So welcome back to the XM Virtual Annual Conference. It is my honor to be with my former colleague and good friend, Deputy Secretary of the Treasury, Wally Adeyemo. We're going to have a conversation today about what is top of mind for everybody is the economy and where we are both domestically and internationally. Obviously, no shortage of things happening. And it is a real pleasure to be able to hear from one of President Biden's and our country's top decision makers on how we are going to steer the ship at such an uncertain time for the United States and really for the world. So with that, I'd love to jump into the conversation. Deputy Secretary Adeyemo, thank you for being with us today.
David, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here with you. Many years ago in the Obama administration, we sat across the hall from each other during an equally uncertain time in the American economy. And it's good to be able to talk to you about President Biden's plan to build back better. It's great to be here at the XM conference today. XM plays a critical role in our economic strategy going forward, especially at a time like this, supporting exporters in our country as they try and find new markets for American goods and services. So I'm looking forward to the conversation.
So why don't we start with a question that I think is top of mind for everybody, which is the state of the economy. Would love to hear from your perspective. Where are we? How are we doing in terms of, we talked a lot about the pandemic. Some people use the past tense. I think those of us paying attention use the present tense, but would love to hear as we're thinking about recovery, short and longer term, where are we? How is recovery going? And what hurdles are there for us to cross before we can really get to the other side of this challenge?
David, the reality is that our economy is better today than it was a year ago because of two important things that President Biden has been focused on. One is getting shots in the arms of the American people. And the second one has been providing resources through the American Rescue Plan to ensure that people can get through the pandemic and land on their feet. Today, more than 75% of Americans have received at least one shot in the arm. And we're seeing the impacts of the stimulus plan that we passed, the American Rescue Plan, in the economy. And that's why the American economy is growing faster than any major developed economy in the world today. But it's clear that we are experiencing headwinds from the Delta variant. And the thing that we know is that the best way for us to address this pandemic is to make sure that we focus on public health first. So ensuring that more and more Americans get the shot is critical to our future success economically. And we also need to make sure that the stimulus continues to work through the economy. One of the reasons that we went big, as Secretary Yellen said, in terms of the American Rescue Plan was because of the uncertainty about the course of the pandemic. And because we put so many resources into the American Rescue Plan, we're still in a place where those resources are going to be spending through the economy for the rest of this year and going into next year, especially at the state and local level. One of the things that we learned in the last recession was that state and local government budgets were devastated, and that meant that people were laid off and didn't return to work, and the infrastructure that was needed to support those local economies dilapidated. Today, because the president's American Rescue Plan, we've put hundreds of billions of dollars into state and local government coffers in order to make sure that they are well prepared to weather the storm and to come out the other side ready to invest in the people and in their economy. We feel confident today because the balance sheet of consumers is quite good, the balance sheet of companies in America are quite good, and the key for us is making sure that we take the steps to end the pandemic and invest in our future, which the president is trying to do as part of his Build Back Better agenda.
A really helpful perspective on kind of the macro perspective on the economy and where the opportunities are and where the advances have been. To go a little more micro, I want to talk about small businesses, which we know are such a vital driver of economic growth for our economy. And obviously we know small businesses have been hit really, really hard and are struggling to figure out how to navigate the current and future trajectory of the pandemic. What resources are there that you would point small business owners to, and what challenges is the Biden administration tackling to ensure that small businesses survive?
So small businesses are critically important to our economy, as you know, David. They are the biggest job creators in our economy. They also are a means towards making sure that in small local, urban, rural communities. Small businesses are often the lifeblood of the communities that they sit in, and the president's committed to making sure that we continue to invest in them. We've done that as part of the American Rescue Plan in terms of providing more money to small businesses, in terms of loans that turn into grants in order to make sure that they were able to stay open during the pandemic. We're going to continue to do that as part of the president's Build Back Better agenda. He's proposed a series of tax incentives that will help small businesses as they begin to recover. But more importantly than that is making sure that we level the playing field for small businesses in this country. Oftentimes, small businesses pay significantly more in taxes than multinational corporations. The average multinational corporation pays about 8 to 8.9% in taxes, which is less than half of what small businesses pay. So a big focus for the president has been making sure that we globally make the economy more competitive by creating a global minimum tax, which will mean that corporations are forced to pay a set rate not only in this country, but around the world, which will allow our small businesses not only to compete better in the United States, but also to compete better as they're trying to sell their goods and services in countries throughout the world. In addition to what we've done in terms of tax policy, my colleagues at the Small Business Administration have also done a great deal in terms of making sure that we can lend to small businesses in need, and also to small businesses that are looking to grow. Because ultimately our goal is to make sure that small businesses turn into bigger businesses over time. As part of the American Rescue Plan, Congress also gave us a great deal of financial resources to invest in states and local governments' ability to grow their businesses through the Small Business Credit Initiative program, which provides $10 billion that will be able to go to small businesses throughout the country as people attempt to grow their businesses in the communities where they live. And as you know, small businesses that grow become the center of activity for a community because they don't only pay to create jobs in those communities, but they sponsor the Little League team. They help to build up a community and build up an ecosystem that supports the type of opportunity we want to see in small and big communities throughout this country.
Perspective, and you've referenced a number of times Build Back Better, which we know is the framework, President Biden's framework for his domestic economic priorities. So let's double click on a few of the core parts of the Build Back Better agenda, starting with the American Rescue Plan. We think about that was one of the earliest moves that the Biden administration, really, I think, successes of the Biden administration was putting in place the American Rescue Plan to get much needed relief and resources to the most vital parts of the economy to keep us going. And I know that Treasury is playing a leading role implementing many parts of the American Rescue Plan. So we'd love to hear what are the major areas of focus for Treasury in implementing the American Rescue Plan, and how are you carrying out that responsibility?
David, I think the American Rescue Plan is largely focused on helping to make sure that the American people can make it through this pandemic and that we're in a position to actually build back better. As you know, I spent most of my time working on issues of international economics, the intersection of economics and national security. And the key for us as a country is making sure that America's economy is the most competitive in the world and continues to be the strongest in the world. In order to do that, we need to make sure that during this pandemic, people don't have what I would call economic scarring, setting us back a generation or a period of time because of the damage caused by the pandemic. That's why we've made the investment in the American Rescue Plan that we've made. And I'd say that at Treasury, we're focused on doing three things with the portion of the American Rescue Plan that we have been asked to steward, which is about $1 trillion of the plan. One is making sure that we get money into the hands of Americans in order to make sure that they have the resources they need to make it from this point in the pandemic to the recovery. That's through things like the child tax credit, which is going to the eligible parents of children under the age of 17. The second has been the stimulus payments that have went directly to Americans to help them pay for the things that they've needed to pay for during the pandemic, either because they've lost a job or they've needed to invest in high-speed internet or buying computers for their children in order to make sure that they're able to keep up with school. Then a second set of investments that we've made are in communities throughout the country. And I've spoken already about the state and local investment that the president made as part of the American Rescue Plan. But it's important to remember that in the last financial crisis, one of the places where jobs were lost the most was at state and local governments that were forced to lay people off because tax revenues dried up and they were unable to make the investments that were needed. We're still paying for the deterioration in state and local budgets today because the infrastructure in those institutions haven't kept up with the needs that those communities have. So by infusing money into state and local governments, we're also creating jobs, but also creating the infrastructure to make sure that we're better prepared to deal with the next crisis. And finally, there have been a set of investments made in the American Rescue Plan that have been about the transition from the recovery to the Build Back Better agenda. Investments in marginalized communities through things like making investments in CDFIs and minority-owned depository institutions that will go on to lend to small businesses in rural communities and urban communities that will help us make sure that the people who have been the most impacted by the pandemic are also being taken care of and also being invested in as we move to the Build Back Better agenda.
That overview, and I can say, from the Black Economic Alliance's perspective, a lot of these investments are extremely important and have had a huge impact on the trajectory of wealth building for families across the economy. But I think about the child tax credit as one example that has, the largest, I think, reduction of poverty in our lifetime, and has reduced child poverty by over 45% across children, and for Black children over 50%. And as you talk about kind of transitioning from the recovery to forward-looking investments in infrastructure, would love to talk about both the bipartisan infrastructure plan, as we're calling it, physical infrastructure, and then the human infrastructure, the American Jobs Plan and American Families Plan. So on the bipartisan infrastructure plan, the kind of physical infrastructure of over $1 trillion that's been agreed to in Congress, how do you look at this impacting communities? And what is how do these investments both impact communities and impact American competitiveness going forward?
Great question. I think it's a very important one for us to think about this in two ways. One is, what are we doing in communities throughout the country? And I'll speak particularly about communities of color, where I think that there's going to be a particular emphasis in terms of unlocking the unrealized potential of marginalized communities. But then I think the second element is, for as a country, how are these investments going to put us in a position to be more competitive going forward? And I spend a great deal of time talking to CEOs throughout the country. And one thing to a person they each mentioned to me is the need for us to invest in infrastructure. Not only because it's an important thing for our country to do, but because they know that it's the key to the competitiveness of their business. And it's not only big businesses that care about this, it's also small businesses. One of the things that we're doing in the bipartisan infrastructure plan is making an investment in broadband technology. And for all of us who have been working from home during the pandemic, we know how important broadband is. But it's not only important to those of us who are working from home, but it's important to kids who are learning from home. It's also important to small businesses that need access to broadband in order to make sure that they're able to not only sell things to their customers who come into the store, but also to potentially become exporters at some point, to export their goods and services outside of the United States to other countries. So in the infrastructure plan, we invest in what people would call traditional infrastructure, roads, bridges, ports, but also we invest in the infrastructure of the 21st century, like broadband technology, which is critical to both unlocking the potential for small businesses, but also for those people who need to use broadband technology to work or to attend school. When you think about the infrastructure package, there's also portions of that infrastructure package that speak to the needs of important communities throughout the country that have often been left behind. We all know the stories of Flint and what happened with their water system. A big piece of this is making sure that we can make investments in ensuring that no child has to drink water that comes from lead pipes. So the infrastructure package both puts us in a position where we can be more competitive going forward by making sure that we make investments now in America that will unlock our potential, but also helps us deal with chronic issues that we've had for too long, like lead pipes that have contaminated the drinking water that our children use. Overall, the package is the package and the ways that we pay for it put us in a position where America can not only be competitive for the next several years, but for the next several decades.
And I think you're absolutely right that the American public absolutely supports, regardless of what type of community you live in, improving our infrastructure. And a lot of these investments are long overdue. But then shifting to the human infrastructure side, particularly the American Jobs Plan and the American Families Plan, these are really focused on a lot of the supports that are necessary to enable everybody to participate in a working economy. So, interested in your perspective on how the investment in human infrastructure, which will go through the reconciliation process, how are you looking at those investments to reshape the economy and aid the businesses, uh, really aid business in the way that we actually work today in our economy?
It's a great question, David. And I think the way that I would think about this is we're making investments in our infrastructure, but we also need to make investments in our people. And over the summer, I've had a chance to do some traveling, talking about the child tax credit in communities like Houston, Texas, and Hartford, Connecticut, and Baltimore, and sit down with parents and people who have been dealing with the pandemic and making it through. And when it comes to talking to them about work and the ability to find jobs that give them the opportunity they deserve, they raise three issues with me. One is getting the skills they need to do a job. Two is transportation. And three is childcare. Those are the three issues that continue to come up. And the infrastructure bill addresses the transportation issues. We are trying to fix our transportation system to make it more accessible to people, make it easier for people to either commute to or work from home with the broadband technology that we're investing in. The human capital plan that the president has announced, the investment in human infrastructure, deals with issues like childcare and also with upskilling people in America. It continues the child tax credit, which, as you said, has done a great deal to reduce child poverty throughout this country, including in Black and Brown communities, but also has provided resources to middle class families throughout the country that will help them do things like afford child care, afford paying for new school books for their children, afford making sure that they don't have to make the choice between paying their rent and paying for food for their children going forward. But it also invests in things like paid family leave, ensuring that not only people who work at the biggest companies in America can take paid family leave, but it's also available to people who work at small businesses. This is something that will both encourage people to find the job that they want, knowing that they have the protections that they need to be able to take care of their families going forward. The two packages come together in a way that put us in a position where the American infrastructure will be better placed to compete in the global economy, and the American worker will be better placed to be an employee at these companies to make sure that overall our economy is best situated to compete, not only for the next few years, but over the next several decades.
Way too. I want to shift gears a little bit and start talking about international economic priorities. We've been focused domestically to this point in the conversation, but so much is happening on the global stage, and you all have been focused. The Biden administration has been really focused on, I think, resetting America's place in both with respect to foreign relations and our place in the global economy. So on trade, and I know this has been an area of focus of your work for many years. Just a few weeks ago, the Vice President Harris went to Southeast Asia to talk about trade, security, and other topics. And on the heels of several years of tumultuous trade negotiations and trade relationships with the United States and other countries and a lot of our allies, what are the administration's priorities at this point for rebuilding our alliances and strengthening trade opportunities in places like Southeast Asia?
It's a great question. I think an important one for us, especially at XM. I think our trade policy and the way we think about trade and investment follows from our overarching international policy. And the president's made it very clear that we're going to do two things first. One is we're going to invest here at home. We know that in order for America to be a good trading partner with countries throughout the world, we want to be put in a place where the American economy is growing as fast and as sustainable as possible. And that's why we're making these investments in infrastructure and in human capital to put America in a place where we can compete with any country in the world. The second piece is strengthening our alliances, making sure that our partners and our allies know that we want to work with them to address both the security challenges we share, but also creating the type of trade and investment environment that reflects our shared values. And I think the key for us is ensuring that we make clear that trade and investment is not separated from our values, but in furtherance of it. And that's what we're doing in terms of the way we're thinking about trade going forward. America is a country that relies greatly on trade, and our goal needs to be to make sure that we're able to grow the amount of exports we are selling in places like the Asia Pacific, the fastest growing region in the world. And that is why the vice president has spent time there talking to their leaders about the full range of issues that we deal with together, from security to investment to trade and to cybersecurity. And what we know is that ultimately, if we are in a place where people are paying by a fair set of rules in the international trading system, we know that America can do well because we have an economy that is innovative and is driven by the idea that competition is good, and that ultimately, if we make the investments here at home, we'll be in a good position to make sure that we're able to be a benefactor of a trading system that is fair and open.
And a related follow-up question is, how does the Biden administration's approach to engaging with our Asian allies fit with the broader international engagement strategy? And what are the areas that you see American leadership being most critical on the international stage?
As you know, America is a Pacific country. We share the Pacific with a number of our Asian allies. And because of that, we are also a country that imports and exports a great deal. Our goal is to grow our exports. And doing that requires us to rely on places like XM to help create incentives for the private sector as they seek new markets and to open new markets for American products abroad. Fundamentally, our Asian allies want America to be engaged in Asia because they recognize that with America comes a certain set of rules that promote fairness and transparency in terms of trade relationships, in which competition happens on a level playing field. And fundamentally for us, in order to make sure that we are able to compete in the 21st century and compete in Asia, we're going to need to ensure that we're providing our companies, our firms, and our workers both with the resources they need, be it through things like XM or through the investments the president wants to make in infrastructure, but also to make sure that we are upholding the rules that the international community has agreed to, be it through the WTO or through our various trade agreements that we have with countries. The key for us is making sure that people are held accountable for following the rules of the road we've all agreed to, and that we're able to compete on a level playing field. Ultimately, if we do that, I'm confident in America's ability to continue to grow our economy and to be an exporting nation in which our exports succeed going forward. But it's going to be critical that we make the investments at home first and that we take the steps needed to ensure that our companies are able to compete on a level playing field going forward.
You know, the pandemic has taught us many things. One of them is, I think, highlighting the interconnected nature of our global economy. And I remember a foolish moment that I think back to probably January of 2020 or so, standing on a subway platform in New York City, reading the New York Times about just the rampant rise of COVID cases in China, and saying, "Oh man, I hope they get that together," as if it was something that wasn't on its way here. And now I think the experience of the last year and a half has disabused me and anybody else of that notion that we are not interconnected. So in thinking about the necessity to get this right everywhere, not just in the United States, in terms of the public health and economic recovery, what steps is the Biden administration taking to build back better abroad and really help drive a sustainable global economic recovery?
You're completely right, David, that the pandemic has taught us an important lesson that existed long before the pandemic, that the global economy and the globe is interconnected. Ultimately, COVID-19 doesn't respect borders, doesn't respect countries. The virus is everywhere and anywhere all at the same time. And that's exactly why the president is committed to making sure that we work with our international allies and partners in countries around the world to end the pandemic. We know that the pandemic doesn't end until it's ended everywhere. You look at the Delta variant, for example. Again, the Delta variant didn't start in the United States, but it's having a devastating impact around the world today. And we know that until everyone is vaccinated in the world, we're going to continue to face the threat of COVID-19. That's why the president and our allies, the G7, committed to providing 500 million shots to the global community. The United States has already provided shots to a number of our allies and partners in order to make sure that they can vaccinate their populations. And we're in a position where we're going to continue to emphasize the need to make sure that in addition to vaccinating every single American, that we take the steps to make sure that the world is able to meet the needs of the global community. But the thing that we should learn from COVID-19 as we deal with this is that there are a number of issues where we're interconnected. Another important one is climate change, a place where we know that we as a country need to work with other countries to deal with an issue that has existential crisis for the world and the global economy. We're hoping that the lessons that we learned from dealing with COVID-19 will provide us with an opportunity to not only deal with this crisis, but also to think about how we better deal with future crises, be they and ensure that future epidemics don't become pandemics, and that we make the investments that are necessary today to ensure that we're better positioned to deal with these things tomorrow.
Segue to climate change, which is really the last topic I want to touch on before we wrap up, with two questions. The first of which is, I think I know we have seen an unprecedented commitment to put resources behind climate change from the Biden administration, and with respect to the financial issues related, there are so many things so many challenges we have to tackle around transforming to a new economy that I think respects the global nature, but respects the kind of reality of what is happening around climate change. So, can you talk a little bit about how Treasury and the administration are approaching the economic issues related to climate change?
David, I think that climate change is one of the most important issues we can deal with, not only in our country, but around the world today. And while it presents us with challenges, it also presents us with opportunities. And it comes back to this idea of the realities that we know that the global economy is going to need to transition to being a clean economy over the next several decades. We have a real opportunity in the United States to make sure that we are the leaders in those clean technologies of the future by making the investments the president calls for in the Build Back Better plan that is being negotiated on the Hill today. Making those investments will mean that as the world makes a transition to a clean economy, we have American goods and services that are available to them for adaptation and mitigation purposes. A big piece of this from the Treasury Department is on the side of incentives, tax incentives, to make sure that we are providing incentives for the production of and the maintenance of clean technologies in this country, investing in things like charging stations in order to make sure that we're in a place where we have a clean economy going forward is a big piece of the puzzle for us. Treasury's role is, outside of the tax incentives, is also making sure that we provide investors and individuals with more information. And part of that is working through the FSOC with the financial regulators to ensure that we're in a place where people have the information they need to make the choices that are needed to make this transition as smooth as possible, but also to ensure that people are making investment decisions that are mindful of the transition that needs to happen going forward. Outside of financial disclosures and thinking through other things that need to happen on the financial regulatory side, finally, Treasury is engaged internationally, thinking through and working with our allies and partners to ensure that we're able to make the transition globally is a critical piece of this. As I said, the answer on the pandemic, the reality is that climate change is a global phenomenon. And until we've dealt with it in every country and ensured that we're in a place where we're meeting the requirements to stop the changing of the climate everywhere, we'll be in a place where we continue to face the challenge here in the United States. So working together with our allies and our partners to address this challenge is a big piece of what Treasury is doing from the finance standpoint. Finding financial means to support mitigation and adaptation around the world is critical to our long-term success, and it's something that Treasury is very focused on.
And as a last question, a bit of an extension to the last, with the UN Conference of the Parties called COP26 coming up, how are you viewing the United States' role in driving action and promoting transition to a cleaner, less carbon-dependent energy sources globally?
And I'll pick up where I left off on the last answer. I think Secretary Kerry is doing a great job of working with our allies and partners to make sure that we're in a position to make COP26 a success. The United States has doubled its commitment in terms of its financial commitment to ensuring that we're in a place where we can help countries around the world work towards adaptation and mitigation of climate risks that exist. And finally, the key thing for us is going to be making sure that we go into this meeting that we have the political will in the United States today, which exists because of the president's clear commitment to making changes in our country, and by taking that political will that we have here, making sure that we help other countries as they think through how they can be ambitious in terms of meeting the commitments that are needed to address the climate challenge going forward. Fundamentally, we know that US leadership is going to be needed here, but we can't do this alone. That's why we're working so closely with our partners and allies to further this cause. And we look forward to using COP26 as a moment in which we can think through all of the success that we've had since the last meeting of the parties, but to think about what ambition looks like in order to make sure that we deal with this challenge in a manner that is befitting of a global community that needs to meet the moment.
And I wish we had another 2 hours to have this conversation, but in the interest of time, we will end the conversation there. But Wally, thank you so much, Deputy Secretary Adeyemo, for your insights. And I think it's a real treat for everyone in the audience to have the perspective of one of our government and our country's top economic legal minds, economic policy minds on some of the most challenging issues we have faced in our lifetime and hopefully that we will face. But I know I've learned a ton in this discussion, and I'm sure the folks in the audience have as well. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being with us. And thank you to the folks at XM for putting together such a robust discussion, and look forward to the rest of the conversation throughout the day.
Thanks, David. Appreciate XM having us and look forward to seeing the rest of the conference.